Welcome to Radical Personal Finance, a show dedicated to providing you with the knowledge, skills, insight, and encouragement you need to live a rich and meaningful life now while building a plan for financial freedom in 10 years or less. My name is Joshua, and today is Tuesday, July 16, 2024. News over the last few days has been saturated with coverage of the assassination attempt of Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump, and with good reason. I'm extremely grateful that the sniper who attempted to shoot him in the head missed and only succeeded in shooting him in the ear, because things could have and would have changed very quickly in the United States had the sniper's bullet succeeded. After any kind of event like this, I always ask, what can I learn? What would I like to learn from the situation at hand? And there's certainly a lot to say. I have a significant level of frustration with Mr. Trump. I'm a politically homeless guy who really gets very frustrated by any discussion of politics these days. But I like to learn from a situation. And yesterday I recorded a podcast related to the event, decided to scrap it, wasn't happy with it. And I thought today, let me give another crack at it. And what I want to talk with you today about are some of the things that I admire about Donald Trump, specifically as to how he has continued his career into his elderly years. And I think there's some lessons there that you and I can learn from. And I want to use him as a very public example of some things to which I aspire, and I think that you should aspire, while also pointing out some of the things that I think are potentially problematic. First, just a couple of quick thoughts on the shooting itself. I am enormously grateful that the shooter's bullet missed. Seems entirely providential to me that he did miss, but I'm grateful that Mr. Trump is still alive. I'm honestly surprised that this kind of thing doesn't happen more frequently, especially in the United States. The United States is an extremely violent country, an extremely violent culture. We Americans, we were birthed in violence, and we have engaged in violence at every turn of our history. And yet, over the last 40 years or so, there's been not too much political violence. Obviously, the last attempted shooting was of President Reagan when he was shot while he was in office. So that was another shooting of a president. But the time before the 1980s, the United States was just rocked with thousands of bombing attempts all across the country and huge amounts of political violence. And if you go back into the annals of history before that, political violence for unions and political parties has just been a constant theme in American history. And yet, over the last several decades, there hasn't been all that much political violence. A significant uptick a few years ago, but on the whole, not very much. And honestly, it's surprising because the tools of violence are generally pretty readily available to Americans. The strangest thing about the shooting was, number one, how close the building was. How the shooter got on the roof and was allowed to take a shot is pretty astonishing. It just got to be complete and total incompetence. Obviously, conspiracy theories are forming left, right, and center by everybody, but just seems pretty broadly incompetent at this point in time. But what is interesting is you can see anybody who's ever held a rifle and shot a rifle understands how relatively easy political violence is to execute. And you can see, I think you think because of the intense protection that's in place for the current president of the United States, and because of how effective that protection is, people often extrapolate the idea to other politicians that all politicians are protected like the current president of the United States is. But that's simply not true. Most politicians, their protection details are very, very minimal. And in a country like the United States, just about any politician, just about any of us, we are subject to being taken out by a long-range rifle shot pretty much at any time. And in any city in the United States, any town in the United States, there are thousands and thousands of people who are fully capable with the skills and the knowledge and the practice, as well as the tools of violence, who could pretty much reach out and kill just about any politician. So it's a good sobering reminder of that. I'm not sure it's a bad thing. I'm grateful, of course, that President Trump survived, but it's probably a good thing that politicians recognize that, hey, if things go, at the end of the day, a lot of people could kill me if they wanted to. And ideally, that allows us to keep a lid on our political rhetoric, trying to keep things tamped down. I'm also amazed it doesn't happen more often just because of how big the United States is. You have 350 million people. I don't remember the current statistics on the population of the U.S., but let's just call it 350. Out of 350 million people, even if the percentage of wackos in the society is relatively small, you're still left with thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of potential wackos that can be touched off with just a few words. And so we really need to work hard to keep our political rhetoric moderate, modest, and pointed rather than moving over into the world of violence, because the entire country could explode into violence without too much difficulty. And so my hope is that we will be more responsible with our words and will seek to focus on debating one another with ideas and civil debate rather than name-calling, partisanship. And by partisanship, I actually mean tribes, basically tribal identity, us versus them communication, versus sitting down and working on things. Some of the things I would love to see us do more of in the United States, I'd love to see us debate more. I'd love to see us actually engage in debate about ideas. One of the saddest things to me is that the whole concept of debate in our modern age has basically fallen apart, and that we debate for sound clips and things that appear and gotchas and getchas rather than meaningful policy debates. That's very frustrating to me. I'd like to see us engage in more discussion of ideas that we disagree with. And I'd like to see us do that without demonizing our opponent. One of the things that you can always do, that I try to do, is remember that, this man that I disagree with, he's not my enemy. He's my opponent. And we may disagree on an issue, but we can still be good friends, even though we may disagree on many issues. And so I hope that we can build in the future more skill with debate, build more public fora for debate on important ideas. And we've got a lot of work to do. I think that it would be really positive to me if we could learn some lessons from the most recent assassination attempt, and we could implement that more and more in our society. Alas, I'm not too hopeful of that happening, but I'm doing my best in whatever way I have the opportunity to simply lead by example and try to facilitate that, which is why I always encourage and facilitate discussion and debate here on this podcast, and I hope that you'll do that in your life too. Again, I don't think that I'm going to be able to affect the direction of the country, but I hope that I can, in my corner of the world, make some small difference, because this kind of stuff can save lives, really can. I think also, just related to the current events, it's important to consider what could have happened if things had gone the other way. What could have happened if Mr. Trump were dead right now? What could have happened? It could have been terrible. It could still be terrible. Out there right now, there's some crackpot wacko who's would love to take out President Biden. Political violence is always available. And by the way, one more comment on political violence. Back to what I said about I'm surprised it doesn't happen more often in the United States. Some months ago, I was looking after was it weeks or months? Recently, after the most recent Mexican set of elections, I was reviewing a list of people who were assassinated during the elections, the general elections all across Mexico. And I was astonished at how extensive the list was. I forget the exact number. I think it was somewhere between 30 and 40, and some people, there were estimates as high as 60. But something like 30 to 40 politicians were assassinated during the most recent round of Mexican elections. And so this is a decent example. It wouldn't be that hard for that kind of thing to happen in the United States again. Again, the Americans are much better equipped for that kind of thing than the Mexicans. It's just that we don't currently have the culture in which that's a normal and accepted thing for those who wish to destroy the political process. And so I think we should be actively working to do everything we can to minimize the risk of violence, and constantly working to create public fora and the skills within people so that they can debate ideas without demonizing their opponents. So I would like to see us to do more with that. Now, more on topic for a personal finance podcast. I've thought a lot about Donald Trump over the years. When I was in college, he was very prominent with The Apprentice show, and my friends and I, we would host watch parties because we enjoyed it so much. And so we would everyone get together and have Apprentice watch shows. So I became fond of him. And after that time, I started reading his books, lost track of him for a long time, but until he became a candidate. And it's always been hard with Trump because the way the web of statements is very hard to pierce and figure out what's true, what's false, what's marketing, what's gimmicky, all of that stuff. And his lifestyle and his life, he's never shied away from attention whatsoever. But one of the things that I've thought about him many times is how inspiring it is for him to keep on going at his age and doing something that he seems to really care about. As much as I can tell, it seems to me that Donald Trump really seems to care about the political work that he is doing. When he first ran for office, I thought, well, he doesn't actually want to win. He's just doing this on a gimmick. He's just doing this as a publicity campaign. I was not a Trump believer or a Trump fan. Then he got the nomination. Then he ran for president, and I didn't believe anything he said at all. And then he got elected. And then I thought, wow, maybe this guy could do it. Maybe he could do something. And for me, the most kind of heart-sickening years were those first 2 years of his first presidential term, where he had been handed a Republican Congress, a Republican Senate, and a Republican president. And I vividly remember the day that John McCain gave his famous thumbs down vote on the floor of the U.S. Senate. And I said, that's it. Republicans are done. This whole thing is a waste of time. And it was just an extremely sad moment for me. So watching Trump then continue through his first term was rather interesting. And then he lost. And then President Biden won. And then Trump didn't give up, didn't quit. And I've thought so many times, what a great example of somebody who achieves material success, has enough money that he could live in comfort for the rest of his life, and yet continues to spend his life fighting for something that he really cares about. And I can't see how somebody who doesn't care could continue to do what that man continues to do and what he continues to fight for. And so I've become a great admirer of that instinct of his to keep on pressing through. And one of the things that's always very difficult to me to figure out, and I don't know that anyone knows, is to try to figure out, is this man actually skillful, or is this just, total blind luck? You go back and you read all the criticisms of Trump and all of the arguments about how much more wealthy he could be if he had never gone into real estate, and about how incompetent he is, and yet on the flip side, he expresses competence. And the lessons that I've taken, let me just sum them up for you in a few things. Number one is the way that you are perceived in many cases is more important than who you actually are. And so Trump has always been a master of image. He's always been extremely conscious of perception. And perception is reality to many people. And I've been amazed again and again about how he's been able to consistently harness that knowledge and consistently press forward when I sure would have given up. And so being aware of how you are perceived and doing your best to present yourself in the way that you want to be perceived is amazing to me. I've also been amazed at his ability to use words to change the course of history. I remember watching when he was in his first presidential campaign, and he started talking about issues on the border, and he started making these ludicrous claims that we're going to build a wall across the southern border and Mexico is going to pay for it. Right? Completely and totally ludicrous. Any person with a few brain cells knew that this is impossible and absurd. And yet, by holding the vision forth, he was able to change things. And systematically, things started to change. People literally started to build walls. And I was amazed at the power of words, that we should be always pay attention to the power of our words and be careful, of course, with the words that we say, and yet use words for good, to call attention to things that really make a difference. So that's something that I came to admire about him, is his ability to use simple speech to literally call things into existence. Another thing that I really came to admire about Mr. Trump was how he had succeeded in building a family integrated organization. His family is not my idea of a dream family. I am so astonished at, I can't even imagine what it would be like to be in his shoes with 3 wives and who knows how many mistresses and who knows how many affairs and all these children from all these different situations. And yet somehow he's able to pool his family together in something of a family working together. And during his first term as president, during his only term as president, during his only term, when he was a president, I was amazed to see how all of these family members were able to work together and potentially make progress. And it certainly was never smooth, and it was never, there were ups and downs, but it was inspiring to see a family that was able to work together and have that sense of family identity. And in the future, I hope that I can build something like that, where I can have adult sons and daughters who are able to work together, who probably are going to have a whole set of problems, but yet can be committed to loyalty to the family and us doing something important together. And so that's something I came to admire about him. Then when he left office, actually one more before we get to that, I was also amazed at how he rose to a challenge. I think the most dramatic video that I used to watch was when then President Obama appeared on one of the late night comedy things. And he went on and on about, President Trump never going to win. And you go back and you watch the White House Correspondents' Dinner, where President Trump was basically being roasted from Trump was being roasted from the stage. And you saw kind of the man make a decision. And he made a decision, I'm going to change this and I'm going to win. And then against all odds, wins. Just an astonishing example of somebody pressing forward and being so committed to a path and then things opening up before him. And just that indomitable spirit that he has consistently expressed is something that I really admire. And then the biggest thing has just been the fact that as old as he is now, I think 78, if my understanding is correct, as old as he is now, he has not wasted his 60s and 70s. He has done something significant with those years of his life, and he's on track to continue to do something significant with his life. I've often wondered what a younger Trump would say about the activities that he's undertaken during these years. Seems like if you go back in history, maybe it was just because he grew up with all of that stuff. But it seems like what most people aspire to is they aspire to a life of hedonism and consumption and dream, okay, I'm going to make it big and earn a lot of money, and I'm going to just go and consume and fly around the world on my yacht. After all, what's the point of being a billionaire if you can't enjoy the money? And just nonstop, never-ending consumption. And yet, Trump, at a time in his life when he could have gone and lived that way, made a different choice. Now, perhaps it was just all personal pride and he didn't like being the butt of all the jokes, and he said, I'm going to show them. Perhaps it was kind of a desire to do good in the world and to change things that he wanted to do. Motivation probably in the end really doesn't matter, and nor could I ever know it. But the point is, he has made his 60s and his 70s count, and he's going into his 9th decade making his life count. And to me, that's something that is extremely inspiring. And that's something that I think we need more of, especially from the baby boom generation. And I would love us to look at the example of Mr. Trump and learn from that and try to be committed to doing the same thing. If you've achieved material success in your life, do you just want your legacy of your life to be that he sat around and consumed his money? Is that the legacy that you want? Or do you want a chance to improve things in a positive direction? Do you want a chance to leave your mark on something? And while I would dearly wish that Trump had never gotten involved with presidential politics and the Republican Party and things that I used to care about, I have to concede that he has fundamentally transformed them. He has used his influence and power to completely transform the political system, to completely transform the Republican Party. And that's something that is worthy of respect. To see a man who doesn't have to do that go and do that is something that's worthy of respect. And so I really appreciate his example in that. And I think that that's something we should pay attention to. Let's make our lives count. Let's not just wander off and say, look, I can travel around the world on my yacht. Fine. Do that for a couple of years. Take a break. But make your life count, especially when you've accumulated power and influence and money. Make your life count. Do something useful. Do something good. And I'm just repeating myself. Make your life count. When I think about Trump and I think about what he could have done with the last 10 years of his life and what instead he chose to do, I got to imagine him lying on his deathbed someday in the future and reflecting. And I got to imagine that he would be pretty happy with the decisions that he has made. And though those decisions were never easy for him, facing lawsuits and legal problems and financial things and all kinds of never-ending setbacks, when the man's lying on his deathbed in the future, I got to imagine he'll have a sense of satisfaction about living his life with focus and determination. And I think that's worth paying attention to. There are many other men that you can see who have done this. I've thought I could create a similar podcast on President Biden and the things that I admire about Biden. I probably won't, but I'll just say here, well, some of the things I admire about President Biden is that he also had that sense of dogged persistence. I can't remember, was this the third time he ran for president? And he had a goal for 50 years to become president of the United States, and it took him a long time, and yet he ultimately was able to accomplish it. I have less respect for professional politicians than I do for people who do something else and then turn to politics. So it's more difficult for me to really focus on that. But I do really respect Biden for his same kind of dogged determination. And I find it interesting that in our society, we have these two aged men who both are setting the example for us of basically not giving up. There's a decent argument to be made that there should be a point in time in which you give up. And I think that's also something that we should factor in. If you're critical of Donald Trump or if you're critical of President Biden and you think they should be given up, then you, because of their age and because of the diminished capacity of reaching a certain age, then you should be thinking about that in your own context. But let's make that 70, whatever it is, 78, rather than focusing on doing that at 58. Don't waste your 50s and 60s and 70s. It's a time that you can make a difference if you're able to. And that's something that we should focus on and gain. So those are just some lessons that I have drawn from current events and everything associated with the current world. Try to go through the world and make a list of people that you admire and things that you admire about them. And if you can create that list while looking at the world, then you'll have a lens to then turn onto your own life and look at your own life and say, here's something that I can learn from this person, and here's how I may be applied in my own life. I don't think that for most of us going into politics is a fruitful endeavor. It is something that I have watched many men do, and I respect them for their effort. And it may be a fruitful endeavor for some of us. So I'm not trying to encourage people to go into politics, though I think that pathway to go and be a man of business or medicine or engage in some kind of important career and then to turn your mind towards statesmanship, that's something that's worthy of respect. But the political game is difficult to actually make a difference in. But recognize, though, that you can still take the lessons that you gain from a politician and then apply them in another area that may perhaps be much more fruitful. That's it for today's show. Let's be grateful for a life that was spared. Let's learn some lessons from it, and let's press on together.